Welcome back, everyone, to the Transcending Neurodiversity podcast. I'm super excited to have Anjana Khosla. I'm actually going to let you say your
Yes.
name. How do you say
No,
it?
that was great. Anjana
Amazing.
Khosla. You said it perfectly.
Awesome. And Anjana is an LMFT based in Nashville, and she did her studies at Palo Alto University, where I'm currently studying to get a MS in psychology. So
Yes.
it's awesome that we have that connection. And I
Yes.
also want to say special congratulations. You got a diagnosis 2 to 3 weeks
Yes,
ago.
I did. I
Yeah,
did. Yes, the
I want to ask you
diagnosis.
about that.
I'm so excited to have received it just because it was so validating in terms of like retrospectively looking back at my life. So I was diagnosed as autistic and also with ADHD. And when I was diagnosed, the person assessing me said something so validating around my diagnoses of major depressive disorder and the label that I was given as far as treatment resistant major depressive disorder and complex PTSD. And hearing him express that, yes, complex PTSD might apply, maybe some of the symptoms of major depressive disorder might apply, but to address neurodivergence as part of it, right, was so incredibly validating. And also to hear him take away, not take away, but reframe the language of treatment resistant major depressive disorder and to say, you know what, I don't think the people who were supporting you were maybe looking at the whole picture. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was wonderful to
Hmm.
have a comprehensive assessment with someone who's also neurodivergent themselves and validating of my experience.
Yeah. And it seems like from your past work, you've done a lot of looking into intersectionality, and it's always kind of been sort of an angle that you've taken in your work as an LMFT and perhaps your studies before. And now that you have this newfound awareness of neurodiversity, how does neurodiversity to you play into intersectional mental health treatment?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's such a great question. You know, it's so interesting to receive that question because in my support of clients, particularly when I'm working with multiple folks in one room, I've always been aware of differences in processing information, differences in communication styles. And I've always intuitively wanted to honor that in terms of how people prefer and feel most comfortable in communicating. And examples of that would include therapy itself is highly verbal, right? And there is preferential focus on verbal processing and doesn't always include other modes of communicating, whether that's through writing, through abstract representation, through body language, whatever it might be. So I always incorporated that into my sessions with a regard for, some folks are internal processors, folks are external processors, sensitivity to sensory input. So that was always top of mind. So I wouldn't say that's changed. But what has changed is my awareness of being able to use the language to honor it, right?
Hmm.
And so in the context of intersectionality, like I really see all of us as this unique thumbprint of overlapping, right? Cultural identity, gender identity, sexual orientation. And now I can really incorporate neurodivergence as a piece of that and call it that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it must be so nice to have a therapist or a practitioner that, can kind of understand that. And you're in a space where everything is kind of accepted and you're not as, I guess, boxed in and labeled. And it also seems like, yeah, your authentic blueprint and all your different identities and just the multi experience. Do you feel that like since you've, I guess, as you develop in this field, you find that like the boxes just open up more and more, and you kind of just keep learning more and more about the dimensions of people?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And empowering folks to explore how to really own those dimensions within a culture that asks us to conform so much at our own expense, right? So um, it's really empowered me to think about how to externalize the pressure to conform, right? And to explore navigating these systems authentically, honoring ourselves.
And how do you help people honor themselves? Or like,
Oh,
like I guess like for someone who goes into your setting,
yeah.
yeah, how do you help people step into that?
In my experience, including in my own journey, I've often encountered folks that don't even know that it's an option to honor yourselves. That's step one, right? Introducing that there is room for that. And there is relational and psychological safety in the therapeutic space for us to go there. So the relationship therapeutically is not threatened by someone exploring their inner self. So that really comes from a place of someone feeling as though their needs are honored. And even before someone knows their needs or can name them, they're met with a curiosity. So that's really the
Mm,
starting for
yeah,
me.
yeah. And yet it seems so simple, right? It's just like all you need to do is just kind of be there for them, right? Like, there's no like magic formula. Um, it's just more of like the recognition
Yes,
that you are a multidimensional being, also giving them permission to explore with curiosity, with
yes.
wonder. Yeah.
You say you're so on point when you say it's so simple. It's not easy though, because it requires us to deconstruct what we've been told is status quo, right? So we need to enter into a territory of suspending that to really allow for the magic of every person to show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious whether, in intersectionality, if I'm just going to list out what I know about it, or the different dimensions of it, it's, our gender and sexual identities and
Mhm.
preferences, and our race, our ethnicity, uh,
Right.
now our neurobiological variation. I'm trying to think of, yeah, what other aspects of intersectionality have you picked up on? And we can get very specific here.
Yeah, no, this is such a brilliant question. You named a few already: gender identity, gender expression. I would even include like a person's multilingual capacity, right? Because the way that we think might shift based on language, cultural context. I also look at the overlapping multiculturality of folks, right? Which includes maybe where our families of origin are from, immigration status, and then nationality within that context. So, really, all the things that can define how we're perceived and how we really are for me. falls under that umbrella of intersectionality, which includes how we, like you said, show up in the world, in terms of like how we take information in and how we comfortably express what works for us, what regulates us, what dysregulates us, right? So it also includes awareness of someone's nervous system.
Um, yeah, so I was gonna mention, in intersectionality, there's also one's own, I guess, unique trauma package. I guess that's just like a term I use. And then also just the unique intergenerational trauma that
Yes.
someone has. I find that often when people talk about intergenerational trauma, it's very like simplified, where it's just like,
Mm,
oh yeah, it's like typical family systems, and your family system was like this or like that. But
right.
again, there's just so much nuance within all of that, whether you come from a Chinese family or you come from a South American
Exactly.
family, there's just liking to unpack just all, like get all the context maybe in your approach.
100%. And that includes, to your point, when I used to work for Family and Children's Services and we do these very thorough assessments, the psychosocial development assessments, we would look at a person's experience and try to even gather information from what their biological parents went through while the child was in utero and even prior, right? Because studies have shown that biologically is passed down, right? As far as stress levels, cortisol, and that all shows up in how our nervous system is going to respond to the world. I think too, another layer of that is that there are certain cultural expectations that are passed down, right? As context changes, those expectations might not necessarily change, which can pose challenges for the next generation and the next generation. So it's an evolution not only of our biology, but also of the cultures that we're embedded in and exposed
Mhm.
to. So the nuance there requires an awareness of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, the values that get passed along, right? Like what do you prioritize? Or were you taught to prioritize? The religion you came from, there's so much religious trauma. It's
Exactly.
never, yeah, it's a never-ending world. And as a coach personally, I just find that like the more context I get on someone, the better. And like
Yes.
almost every session I have with a client, I'm just getting more and more context. I'm getting more and more of the
Yeah.
interdimensionality to the point where it's almost like and I don't know how you can relate to this, but it's almost like, yeah, I don't even when people ask me what my technique is or what my angle is, it's almost like I kind of have to get out of the box of what's traditionally, I don't know, what's taught. And it's more like a human to human interaction, being there for them, holding space for them, maybe just
Yeah.
letting them explore and come to awareness, what's going on in their world. Have you kind of found that with yourself, where in a way the session becomes less about, following a specific format and more just about
Yeah.
human to human?
And, and I think that's honestly a truly person-centered approach, right? When we're sitting with someone and allowing them to lead. And when I think about ethically as therapists, what are we honoring within that space? Self-determination is a huge component, right? So if we're sitting with someone's self-determination and respecting their autonomy, we're essentially following their lead. So I find myself definitely pulling more from those person-centered approaches and techniques. I mentioned when we were talking earlier, I do pull from feminist therapeutic techniques and the concepts of intersectionality in order to create a framework to support people to externalize what isn't truly theirs, recognize that it's there. We still have to navigate it, right? But how do we come back to ourselves and how we choose to navigate it, right? whether that's from a place of survival, whether that's from a place of, you know, owning who we are, whether that's a place of like just moving through it the best way that we can, right? And
Hmm.
exploring options within that. Because I think a lot of times we feel disempowered when we think we don't have options, right? But if we can explore what are our internal options in response to the circumstances that we're a part of, and where do I make more internal space for myself, I think that can open up a pathway for emotional resilience.
Hmm. Yeah, I really liked when you said, kind of unburdening yourself, or like just paraphrasing, but unburdening yourself from the things that you're not,
Yes,
and not taking on the things that you're not. And
exactly.
you also mentioned kind of like the feminist approach,
Yeah,
or it's yeah, the feminist therapeutic approach.
yeah,
Could you touch a little bit on what that is and how that plays into all
yeah,
this?
absolutely. So a lot of times people hear the word feminist, right? And they think that it means one thing. In the way that I mean it is we want to just look at the systems that are currently in place that provide preferential treatment for certain ways of being, whether that's in the context of gender, identity, expression, sexual orientation, information processing, you name it, right? So when these systems are in place that are reinforcing preference for a status quo, those who don't fit that status quo, right, might end up feeling less than or feeling not good enough or overextending to try to fit it at their own expense. And so, what I try to do is support folks in acknowledging, okay, that does exist in the world. Now, how do we separate ourselves from that so that we can explore what genuinely works for us? Right. So, for myself, with my diagnosis of ADHD, right? When I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone, right? And when I, there are certain things that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have a hard time getting in the zone for this, whether that's in the context of scheduling or in the context of organizing certain documents. I have to find systems that are going to help me with that and empower me as opposed to what I was doing at one point in time, which is what's wrong with me, asking myself, like, what's wrong with me, right? And then that adds this other layer of self defeat. And
Hmm.
so when I say feminist therapeutic approach, that's really what I'm looking at. I'm looking at let's separate ourselves from these systems, learn how to navigate them in ways that actually try to work, that actually work for us, as opposed to just trying to get approval from them.
Hmm. Get approval from
The
them. Could
systems
you
or the
elaborate on that?
people
Yeah.
that are within those systems,
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, asking or by overextending.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow, there's so much in that was interesting. But it seems like a lot of this just comes back to self-awareness and self-exploration, like
Yeah,
almost like self-realization.
yeah,
Like you're just realizing what you already were, but beyond all of this.
yeah.
And from what I remember, you also, like to incorporate kind of like Eastern philosophies or Eastern mind, body, holistic, sort of like being inspired from that world. Could you touch a little bit on where that plays in for you?
Yeah, some of that, comes from my own intersectionality, being a first generation Indian American and also a survivor of trauma. And my introduction to yoga at a really, really young age gave me a sense of regulating my own nervous system through movement and breath work. And the permission to really explore my internal world, regardless of what was going on around me. Right. So I felt incredibly centered and grounded in that. So that's over the year, now that I'm in my 40s, right? Over the years has just evolved into um, incorporating it into my therapeutic approach, right? In the room with a client. And that has everything to do with like feeling into a client's nervous system, using my own nervous system to support co-regulation, right, through attunement and through responsiveness. So, right, helping someone come out of, let's say, dorsal vagal mode, right, if someone's really shut down. How do we not just think our way out of it, but how do we move our way out of it by shifting our nervous system state? And that's something for me that goes way back into yoga.
Hmm. Yeah, now you're really speaking my language.
Yeah,
And yeah, what's coming up for me as you say this is it's really working with people who are just more sensitive and empathic. And I get the sense the further along I go that people have always been more empathic or sensitive than they've admitted
yeah,
or, self-reported.
yeah,
It used to be something where, every now and then someone would say, "Yeah, I'm a little more sensitive." But
yeah,
then now I almost feel like everyone I get to know has sensitivities, and with that, a lot of that comes from being in tune with your nervous system, kind of like on getting to the things on the level of energy. How do I
yeah,
feel emotionally, energetically? How did that experience leave me feeling? And it's
totally.
completely somatic work. Like in Western psychology, for the longest time, the mind and the body were separated, obviously. And now as we learn more and more, it's just this unified system. And empaths are really yeah, so how do I guess is there anything there that you want to
Yeah,
touch on?
100%. 100%. You know, to your point of the mind body separation, right? And asking those questions around what is cognition versus consciousness, right? And we've always kind of separated it as this abstract thing in the brain, right? And then the body just moves. But if we really want to even bring science into this to tie it together, something I often talk about is interoception. And we're often told we only have five senses, right? Sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. But folks don't often talk about the other senses, vestibular sense, our sense of balance, right? Proprioception, which is knowing where our body is in relation to itself. So, for example, like my eyes are closed, but I know where to touch my nose or my ear. And then the other sense, the eighth sense, interoception, which is so deeply connected to the therapeutic field, right? The cues our body gives us to make decisions in relation to the outside world. So, hunger, thirst, using the restroom, nausea, all of that's included, but so is affect. What are our moods, right? Our feelings. I'm scared, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm happy. All of those sensations tell us something about what we might need in relation to the outside world. And where this ties into mindfulness, along with an awareness of the external systems we're a part of, is that, more often than not, we're told to shut off our interoceptive awareness, right? We're in school, we're not allowed to use the restroom typically, except for a certain time. We only eat during a certain time, right? And what that can tell us to do is turn it off and just go off of this schedule, as opposed to develop a relationship with your body's signals to know and understand what you need. So that's where it all comes together for me within the therapeutic setting and just living life, right? If we can start to interpret our own internal cues, where can that lead us, right? We talked about authenticity before, right? How can we then authentically move through the world while self advocating for who we are?
Hmm. Yeah, and this really reminds me of, some neurodivergents talk about their neurodivergent superpowers, which is really just, yeah, those senses you touched on.
Sure.
and those things that have kind of had to be suppressed or that we've been told isn't legitimate, having to kind of deny our own intuition. It's almost like the system has gaslit like both neurodivergence and neurotypicals in a way, because it's just
Yeah,
really boxed them in like that. And yeah, and so it's almost like having a more intersectional practice will empower people in all these different ways and kind of help them, not just realize who they are, but how they become a better fit in the world
for
at
sure.
the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. And to your point around how, these systems have boxed in neurotypicals and folks who are neurodivergent, you know, that even applies to how we experience co-regulation, right? And how we are able to soothe our own nervous systems in the company of other people. And there isn't necessarily one way for that to look. And I think once we're willing to understand that, there's so much room, particularly in the context of relationship, for affirmative relating as opposed to like it has to look a certain way or it kind of takes some of the inherent power dynamics out of relating.
How would you define co-regulation?
Co-regulation, not dissimilar from attunement, but co-regulation is when we have multiple nervous systems in a shared space, and those nervous systems can create a sense of ease for each other, right? So the way something that I've learned that was just so affirming for me, especially when I was meeting with the psychiatrist who assessed me, um, the way that he talked about, like in the context of environments where people are typically all neurotypical, right? Someone might feel really co-regulated by having chit chat and by being really polite and kind of not broaching to some of the harder topics. I have always found that extremely dysregulating because it feels avoidant, it feels inauthentic
Mhm.
to who I am, right? I want to go deep. I want to be able to know someone's lived experience and share my own lived experience, right? It feels more real to me. So hearing the the psychiatrist really affirmed that for me felt like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. So I try to keep that in mind, not only when I'm in a space with clients, but just with other people, that how we experience a sense of ease with each other is going to vary, right? And if I'm
Mhm.
open to the reality that what you need is going to be different from what I need, then we can find and negotiate some middle ground that works for both of us, where both our needs are met enough, right? And
Mhm.
so the this ties back to the power differential piece because when we have an assumed way of how it's supposed to look, then we're just conforming and we're self-suppressing, right? And the person who's inherently closer to the status quo holds the power differential in that case.
Mhm. Wow. Wow, that really, yeah, I hadn't made that connection before. But that's really interesting. Yeah, the person who fits into the system more has the most power in the dynamic. And then, yeah, that becomes a power imbalance. And
Yeah.
what this is really bringing up for me too is, yeah, do you have
Oh, I was
anything you want to say or?
just gonna say too, like we might not even be aware of it, but we feel it.
Hmm. Yes, that's true as well. We're all a work in progress. The field is a work in progress. And yeah, at the time of this conversation, there's still so much more exploration to be done, and we remain open to that. But in what you were saying, it also really brought up the fact that, yeah, being open and curious, like being very adaptable and not making someone fit into a structure without really knowing everything about them. It just like a very loving thing to do is just not assuming what they need, not assuming what works best for them, not trying to
Yeah,
control them and put them into something. Because a lot of trauma and limiting beliefs and just people's psychological challenges just come a lot of times you can say stem from a lack of just love,
yeah,
and humans would be nothing without the love of their parents, the love that they received as a little child. And so now when they're adults and they're looking to heal from these psychological, emotional challenges, at the end of the day, it is a lot of it is, in my perspective, like a return to love.
yeah. I do agree.
And love isn't just that romantic love or
Right.
that, friendship or holding space for someone, being open, being curious, even though you know nothing about them,
Yeah.
just accepting them for who they are, accepting where their years has been missing. So if you have anything to touch on in that, I'd be interested. But I'm also interested in hearing just like where does, yeah, I guess does the what I said about love and the philosophy behind love like play into
Uh,
any
it's
of this for
it's
you?
it's so lovely how you brought that in, and I would say it plays a significant role in the context, like the ways that I try to bring it in therapeutically as far as frameworks. When we spoke earlier, I mentioned internal family systems, and a key component of internal family systems is that we have these parts of ourselves that evolve in response to our experiences, right? We have parts of us that are exiled because they carry the weight of so much pain, the parts that feel broken, the parts that feel not good enough. And then we have these manager parts that show up to protect us from the pain of our exiles, right? We might be a rationalizer, a spiritualizer, or a people pleaser, right? We have all these overlapping parts that manage keeping the pain at bay. And then we have firefighter parts who essentially show up to keep the pain away at any expense. So that's in the context of homicidality, suicidality, rage, self harm, addiction. But within all of that, internal family systems talks about self energy and the core self. And the core self possesses qualities of patience, persistence, compassion, courageousness, curiosity, right? And in essence, to me, that is what encapsulates love, right? As a verb, love as a state of being. And
Hmm.
so our capacity to really be in that space and zone and offer that to other people requires knowing ourselves well and knowing our parts and how our parts show up, unburdening those parts, right? And really being able to access that core self energy in ourselves, right? And this is
Hmm.
what, for me, moves me, not just in the therapeutic spaces, but in the world, in the context of like social justice and really supporting people in being who they are and feeling supported, like collectively as well as within themselves.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, there's this phrase that I hear being used a lot, um, which is, we can only meet others as deeply as we've met ourselves.
Right.
And now, there's maybe nuance to that statement, but I do definitely resonate with it. And I feel that, yeah, it almost should be a requirement for healthcare professionals to really also just do a lot of work on themselves. Um,
Yeah.
which is difficult because they have such busy schedules. But really, yeah, it is something that in the nervous system and being put through I guess, where to this? Like, have you
Yeah.
had past experiences in therapy maybe
Yeah.
that, that inspired you in this way, or yeah, can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had a professor in grad school say to me, you wouldn't be here if someone in your life didn't show you the power of relationship, right? And that's something I've carried with me. So if I'm holding myself to a certain standard in how in showing up with clients and people in my life as far as relationally, right? That also begs the question of, well, how do I replenish myself and take care of myself? What are my internal and external resources? And how do I maximize access to those things? And I can feel that in my own nervous system. It's unspoken, right? So, I would have to say that over the years, it's something I've always believed and known, right, from a very young age. My own exposure to trauma and not having it, not having support, and then finding that, I do need to have spaces that really honor me, right? Whether that's through yoga, whether that's through other therapists who get me, right? Consultations, time to hang out, being in nature, knowing what my own needs are. And as a therapist, we're always told consult, 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 right? That translates into, if we really take that seriously, that translates into co-regulating with each other, holding space for each other. You doing this podcast even, right? Providing information and education, and bringing people together to explore and hear and feel supported. So I would say, yeah, I've been able to receive it from therapists, from colleagues, from friends, where there is a culture and understanding around needs and honoring that. And no one's needy. We just all have needs, right? And it's a question of
Hmm.
exploring what resources support those needs.
Within ourselves, like creating space within ourselves.
Yeah.
People often know this as, emptying the mind, kind of like from a meditation-y Buddhist
Yeah.
place. Burden, like we take on so much in life, whether it's at or just like, and can kind of just leave us feeling very disoriented and
Yeah.
scattered. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it again comes to this body. Um, and we talked about this earlier about getting back into the body.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, I'm wondering, yeah, I guess again, I don't really have a question, but does anything really pop out to you that you want to touch on?
Yeah, the language that you use there is so on point, right? We start to feel really scattered. The way that I think of healing is an integration process. We're able to integrate the parts and pieces of ourselves that are disembodied from us, right? So, what does integration really look like? It looks like being with, it looks like observing, it looks like genuine, not tolerance, but acceptance, so that we can be empowered to make decisions in response, right? We become the authority of ourselves, right? Which ironically opens up even deeper connections relationally. So, to your point, the mindfulness and the meditation
Mhm.
of it is huge because, like, for example, with yoga, it's a question of thinking about what your nervous system needs in a given moment. And movement is a huge piece of that. Breath work is a huge piece of that. And as the nervous system becomes more regulated, what does that open us up to in the context of capacity, right?
Mhm.
So, a lot of trauma informed approaches talk about the window of tolerance, right? And widening that window of tolerance, being able to stay in a more engaged window of tolerance within reason, of course, right? As opposed to hyperarousal or hypoarousal, knowing how to give our bodies what it needs, right, requires being with our bodies, right? Whether that's in a meditative state, laying down,
Mm-hmm.
sitting, or moving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna ask exactly about this, is just, how neurodivergence can stay self-regulated, is how can we stay balanced? How can we stay energetically, emotionally, mentally balanced? And so I loved some of what you said with breath work and going outside and yoga. Um, yeah. And then, but yeah, there's still, I think there's so much in this topic
Hmm.
when it gets to, work
For
accommodations and relationships. So yeah, is there anything there that you're just like
sure.
this?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'll even just speak from my own personal experience. Growing up, going through university, and then being in relationship with folks who are neurotypical, more extroverted. And I myself just being totally overwhelmed by being in spaces that were really loud, right? My work style, I work in spurts. So having my own practice has really worked for me in that regard, where I can honor my own biorhythms and also my energy rhythms. So, in the context of neurodivergence, right, what we're looking at is affirming that our rhythms don't have to fit in this neurotypical 9 to 5, go out for happy hour drinks after, right, then dinner or whatever type of model. We get to explore how our own rhythms can inform our decision making processes and our boundaries, right? And the way that I define boundaries is the things that we do to take care of ourselves. They're not how we push people away, they're what we do to take care of ourselves, having clarity about that. So for myself, like I just don't go out and eat in restaurants, especially if I've had a very, very long day, right? So I'm I just own that, right? So if a friend wants to connect,
Mhm.
we explore what might be an option that works for both of us and that won't be overwhelming for me and won't be, overwhelming for them either.
Exactly, yeah. Um, Yeah, and even that example you said of, not going to restaurants after a busy day, like to me at this stage in my healing, that's like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
before I was, attuned and aware of what was going on in my body, it just I wasn't aware of that. I just thought, okay, I have these plans after this. I need to go to them, even if I feel destroyed. And
Yeah.
so this has personally compelled me to just keep researching like everything, keep understanding, the gut microbiome
Yeah.
to, our like history for me about my own, yeah, I guess aspects of life.
I love what you said. Some of it cut out, but I think I got most of what you said as far as staying open and curious. What that really evokes for me is this awareness that nothing about us is really static. We are shifting states, our bodies are changing and engaging with the world around, right? And so I think, to your point, when you brought up meditation and we talked about interoception, what that allows for us to do is really move with the dynamic nature of existing, right? It's having tools that allow for us to move in a way that
Mhm.
is less harmful to ourselves and others.
Yeah. Yeah. And what this also made me think of is that the world nowadays has, especially here in the West, it's
Mhm.
very I guess society to me is very technological,
Mm-hmm.
hedonistic,
Mm-hmm.
materialistic, mechanistic,
Mm-hmm.
reductionist,
Yeah.
which none of those things in of themselves are like problems, right? It's just,
Right.
they're more just how, what society has done to yeah, to most efficiently evolve. But in a way, I feel that yeah, that the world is very left brains these
Yeah.
days. So very, very rigid, reductionist, everything broken down into small pieces. And yeah, it's kind of like a manifestation of technology, which is
Yeah.
just everything is just a sum of these identifiable parts. And while that is satisfying in some ways and it helps with it's helped advance science in great ways. And
For
but
sure.
mostly in the sense of technology. But when it comes to the brain, now we're getting into something that, yeah, it's hard to break down into pieces. It's hard to really understand it all. Even when you break it down at the cellular level, it's like there's so much nuance there. And this is where, yeah, I think I encourage people to get out of that left brain's
Yeah.
mechanistic, technological way of thinking and stepping more into that right brain's with seeing it. I was literally looking into this term this morning. It's like phenomenology,
Yes,
which
yes,
is
yes,
just the first person experience of something. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And to me, that's like essentially what the East has been doing since the beginning. They've always taken this like phenomenological approach. What do you feel in your experience? And kind
yes.
of understanding the world through that. Kind of like from an inside out perspective rather than outside in.
100%.
Um, and so yeah, to me it's almost like yeah, so it's not about brain ways down, but it's more, how can we integrate this like right brains approach into this whole model?
Yes.
I guess have you had similar thoughts? Yeah.
Very similar. And you use the very word that I was thinking about because you described, the left brain and, this reductionist approach. And you then moved to using the word integrative, right? And so what does it mean? Both have benefits. What does it mean to bring the two together, to understand the pieces, but also the relational elements of those pieces in the context of how they relate, like the sum, right? That's the integration. That's the it's almost like when I look at supporting either family systems or folks in relationship, I honor each individual experience and each individual person and nervous system while recognizing the relationship itself is its own system and needs to be viewed as such, right? And how the folks interact and the dynamics that play out. And I think that's the difference, right? We need both. We can't
Hmm.
be one-sided and we're just looking at the individual pieces or we're just looking at the system. Let's actually look at how it moves together, all of it.
How do you think the Western world or academia
Uh-huh.
or Western psychology in general, how do you think they could kind of open their world a little more? How could we see more progress into this integration of of this human-based approach?
Well, I think you already named,
Share
right?
some thoughts. Yeah.
What's so hard is the scientific method itself asks, right, for consistency, reliability, right? Being able to reproduce something with the same results over and over again. When we're looking at phenomenology and we're honoring lived experiences and the dynamic nature of existing, that seems like it's in contradiction, right, to labeling something as evidence-based. So I think the very nature of the Western world emphasizing what we know and what we can see, touch, feel, taste, and hear is great, but it's not including even the interoceptive states that I was describing earlier. So, where do we really make room and have conversation around what is not known and be comfortable with that? And I think just the way Western science has evolved, it's cut that part out. But all of the people that I've
Hmm.
met who are deeply embedded in mathematics and science on like a PhD level onwards, right? I mean, Einstein said it himself too, right? The more I actually respect what is unknown because the more you realize it, right?
Hmm.
So, um, I think it really goes back to curiosity, right? Because I think on a really rudimentary level, when we're just starting out exploring something scientifically, we're just like, this is how it looks, this is what it is. But then the deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper we go, we start to see, hold on, there's so much we don't know, right? And
Hmm.
physicists will even say this as we move into quantum mechanics and quantum physics, right? It's kind of mind-boggling how if we're willing to go deep enough, we will get there to this
Hmm.
place of integrative holding that doesn't require dissecting something into pieces by the mind.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because yeah, there are some things that just we don't know if we'll ever have the scientific measurements to measure something like intuition, right?
Right.
Maybe the technology that we need to measure something like intuition or body, like we almost are like a piece of technology, or we
Totally.
can measure things ourselves because we are studying, we are studying our own experience. Yeah. And it seems like from everything we've got or everything I've gathered in my study of this is that in the West and the way science has evolved, it's almost like quantitative data, something you can put numbers on,
Yes.
um, is very like highly valued. And that is like that's almost like, yeah, that's how we can affirm something is true. That's how we can know. When it comes to
Mm,
qualitative data, it almost gets into the arts, right? It's just like it's almost like yeah, it almost becomes something um but yeah, it's very slow moving to move from lots and lots of quality can make yeah, like we can now move forward and introduce this even if it comes off mystical. This also gets into things like how other cultures treat something like psychosis. In the
totally.
West, when someone hears voices or gets put him on drugs, put him in a
Yeah.
psych ward, this is not normal. And then in other cultures, those people are treated so much differently, and it's like very much honored. It might be seen as channeling or talking
Right.
to talking to spirits in the air. And that's just one example. But it just seems like there's such a difference in that. And yeah, there's a lot I can say on this topic too, in terms of also kind of like the ethnocentric way that
Yes.
the West has treated psychology and healthcare. In terms of, seeing everything from kind of a Eurocentric point of view. The way that a lot of science has evolved is there's so much overlap between the colonial era, the
There is.
Industrial Revolution, and like the scientific revolution.
Yes.
And it almost got to this place where Europe was almost incentivized as they were colonizing all these other countries to say our ways are the best and their ways are flawed, and therefore
Yeah.
we should impose ourselves onto these cultures. And then
100.
so a lot of these indigenous sciences and wisdom and medicine just got completely, it became almost yeah, it became automatic for the Western world to just see those practices as illegitimate. It's
Correct.
almost, yeah, it is rooted in
Yeah.
racism, if I'm gonna, yeah,
Totally.
if I'm
And
just gonna be direct. I
yeah,
believe. Although it's well meant, obviously, people are trying to also understand what's best for the world.
that's
But
right.
it also is, to me, a lot of this is like,
Okay, okay. It cut out. It sounded like it cut
yeah, I
out
can
for
hear
a
you.
sec.
Okay.
It's it's so interesting you bring all of that up. I don't know if I mentioned to you that I'm writing a book chapter for students of social work. And the very thing that you're talking about is what we're writing about in this book. I'm collaborating with my colleague at Rutgers. And we're looking at attachment theory specifically and how it evolved from psychodynamic theory, right? Through Klein's work and Ainsworth and et cetera. But what wasn't taken into consideration was the context, the cultural context of how information and relationships were being studied. And there was this inherent assumption that a certain way of existing was superior to other ways of existing culturally, right? In the context of colonization. So, my colleague and I are working on a book chapter where what we're calling it is queer and culture affirming attachment framework to support clinicians in really having more of a holistic approach to honor the experiences of multicultural people, queer people, and immigrants so that we can really move past, right, the embedded colonizing mindset or roots, I should say, in the psychological field. I think honestly the 60s had a lot to do with this because that's when we started to see a lot of movement in the world as far as like integrative voices, the concept of intersectionality, the civil rights movement, right, women's rights, et cetera, et cetera. That's when we really started to see a shift here in the field, and I think we're trying to get that more and more along. So I really appreciate you bringing
And it seems, yeah, like intersectionality is almost like, yeah, it's almost like doing the catch-up
that.
work that needed to happen a long, long
Yeah,
time ago. And same with just this holistic model of
yeah.
things. Yeah, we've talked about some great things.
I feel like we touched on so many things that if we like went down the rabbit hole of each thing, we'd have like a 10-hour conversation. But we touch on so many important pieces that I feel are so relevant to just who the podcast itself, Transcending Neurodiversity, and um, who I am. So I really appreciate you making space for that.